The school hallways were quiet as Rosa pushed her cleaning cart forward. The wheels squeaked a little. She'd been asking for a new cart for months, but the school budget was tight as always. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting golden rectangles on the freshly mopped floor. Rosa sighed, checking her watch. If she hurried, she could finish the music wing before 5 and still make it to the corner store to pick up ingredients for dinner before her kids got home from their after-school programs. At 42, Rosa's hands were rough from years of cleaning chemicals. Her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun with a few strands escaping around her face. 15 years as a school janitor had taught her to be invisible, moving through hallways when students and teachers were gone, leaving everything spotless before they returned. Most days she didn't mind. The job paid just enough to keep her small apartment and feed her 3 growing children. But some days, like today, the emptiness of the big school building made her feel lonely. Just 2 more rooms, she reminded herself, pushing the cart toward the choir room. She hummed softly, a habit she'd picked up to keep herself company during the quiet afternoon hours. Her oldest daughter, Lucia, had taught her the song, something popular the teenagers were listening to these days. Rosa paused when she reached the double doors of the music department. Something was different. The light was on in the main practice room, and soft notes from the grand piano drifted into the hallway. That was strange. The band director, Mr. Hanson, always left right after the final bell, and students needed special permission to stay this late. She hesitated, wondering if she should come back later. But it was already getting late, and Lucia would be watching her younger siblings only until 6. Rosa couldn't afford to fall behind. She knocked gently on the door before pushing it open, not wanting to startle whoever was inside. "Excuse me," she called softly. "I need to clean this room before—" Her words died away as she took in the scene. A man sat at the grand piano, his fingers hovering over the keys without pressing them down. He wore an expensive-looking gray suit that probably cost more than Rosa earned in a month. He turned at the sound of her voice, and she noticed he had kind eyes, though they looked tired. "I'm so sorry," the man said, standing quickly. "I didn't realize anyone would still be here. You must be trying to close up." Rosa clutched her cart handle. "It's okay. I just need to clean the room. I can come back if you're busy." The man shook his head. "No, please. I've overstayed already." He ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "The school administrators gave me a tour earlier, but I asked to sit with the piano for a few minutes. I guess those minutes turned into nearly an hour." He smiled apologetically. Rosa nodded and began her routine, emptying the small trash can by the door, replacing the liner. She could feel the man watching her. "I'm Thomas Reeves," he said suddenly. "I'm starting a music program here." Rosa glanced up, surprised that he was introducing himself to the cleaning lady. "I'm Rosa Delgado," she replied. "I've worked here for 15 years. 15 years? You must know this school better than anyone." Rosa laughed softly. "Maybe. I see everything, but most people don't see me." Thomas's expression changed, becoming more thoughtful. "That happens to a lot of important people, the ones who keep places running." She wasn't used to being called important. Rosa moved to the whiteboard, wiping away the day's music notes and lesson plans. She could feel Thomas still watching her. "Do you have children, Rosa?" he asked. The question surprised her, but she nodded. 3, my oldest is 16, and my son is 12, and my youngest girl is 9. "Are any of them musical?" Rosa paused in her cleaning. Why was this rich man asking about her family? But there was something genuine in his eyes that made her answer. "My son Gabriel sings all the time, around the apartment, in the shower. He has a beautiful voice. And my little one Isabel, she dances to anything with a beat." Rosa smiled at the thought. "But lessons are expensive. We make do with the radio and whatever they learn in school." Thomas nodded slowly, his fingers absently brushing the piano keys without making a sound. "Music changed my life," he said quietly, almost to himself. Rosa continued cleaning, but she was curious now. "Are you a musician?" He laughed. "Not professionally, but music gave me a path when I needed one." He stood up from the piano bench and walked to the window, looking out at the school's empty playground. "I grew up poor, the kind of poor where dinner wasn't guaranteed every night. But there was an old upright piano at the community center. A volunteer taught me to play." Rosa stopped cleaning entirely now, cloth still in hand. "Music requires discipline," Thomas continued. Practice, patience, persistence. Those skills transferred to everything else. I studied hard, got scholarships, built a tech company, sold it last year for more money than I ever imagined possible. He turned back to her and Rosa suddenly understood who he was. There had been excitement among the teachers about some millionaire donor visiting the school. She hadn't paid much attention. Rich people's business rarely affected her world. That's why I'm starting these music programs in schools like this one, Thomas explained. Kids with talent shouldn't miss out just because their families can't afford lessons. Rosa nodded. That's very generous. She returned to wiping down the student desks, aware that she was falling behind schedule. Thomas walked back to the piano and sat down again. Rosa, he said suddenly, would you sit with me for a minute? She hesitated, glancing at her card and then at her watch. I still have another room to clean. Just for a minute, he promised. Reluctantly, Rosa set down her cleaning supplies and approached the piano. Thomas moved to one side of the bench, making space for her. She sat stiffly, aware of her worn uniform and cleaning chemical smell next to his expensive suit. Have you ever played? He asked. Rosa shook her head. No, never, not even as a child. We didn't have instruments growing up. My mother cleaned houses like me. She didn't add that they'd barely had enough food, let alone money for music lessons. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. Then he said something that made Rosa wonder if she'd heard him correctly. Play one note, he said, and I'll donate $10,000 to your family. Rosa stared at him. In the hallway outside, she heard footsteps pause, probably the night security guard making his rounds. From the corner of her eye, she saw a couple of teachers who were working late stop by the door, curious about the well-dressed visitor. What? Rosa finally managed. One note, Thomas repeated. Any key. Just press one that feels right to you. Rosa's heart began pounding. Was this some kind of joke? Rich people sometimes had strange ideas of humor. Why would you do that? Because I believe everyone has music in them, he said simply. And sometimes people just need a chance to find it. Rosa looked down at the piano keys, so many of them, white and black, stretching across the grand piano. Her hands, rough from years of work, hovered uncertainly above them. This isn't a trick, Thomas assured her, noticing her hesitation. I promise. In the doorway, the small group of late-working staff had grown. The security guard, Mr. Patterson, stood watching with arms crossed. Two teachers from the math department whispered to each other. Even Mrs. Winters, the assistant principal, had appeared, drawn by the unusual scene. Rosa's mouth felt dry. $10,000 was more than 3 months' salary for her. It could fix the leak in their apartment ceiling, buy Lucia the laptop she needed for school, get Gabriel those braces the dentist said he should have. It seemed impossible that such a sum could be hers for simply pressing a piano key. I don't understand, she whispered. Why me? Thomas's eyes grew distant for a moment. Because someone once gave me a chance when I was invisible too. Rosa looked again at the keyboard. Her finger trembled slightly as she extended it over the keys. She could feel everyone watching holding their breath. She pressed down on a key near the middle of the piano. The note rang out, clear, pure, and surprisingly loud in the quiet room. Rosa felt the vibration travel up her finger, through her hand, and somehow straight to her heart. And everyone, Thomas, Rosa, and the small crowd gathered at the door, froze, as if time itself had paused to listen to that single, perfect note as it filled the room and slowly faded away. The single note hung in the air, fading slowly until there was nothing but silence. Rosa stared at her finger, still resting lightly on the key she'd pressed. Had she really just done that? The small crowd at the door seemed to be holding their breath. Thomas smiled, a genuine warmth reaching his eyes. Beautiful, he said softly. Rosa felt her cheeks grow warm. It was just one note, she whispered. Sometimes one note is all it takes. Thomas reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek leather checkbook. Rosa's heart skipped a beat as she watched him uncap an expensive-looking pen. You were serious? Her voice came out higher than normal. About the money? The security guard, Mr. Patterson, stepped into the room. Everything okay in here, Mrs. Delgado? His eyes moved suspiciously between Rosa and Thomas. Yes, Rosa said quickly. Mr. Reeves is... he's... She didn't know how to explain what was happening because she hardly believed it herself. I'm making good on a promise, Thomas said, looking up from the checkbook. He nodded respectfully to the small group now gathered just inside the doorway. I told Rosa that if she played one note on this piano, I would donate $10,000 to her family. Mrs. Winters, the assistant principal, stepped forward with a puzzled expression. I don't understand, Mr. Reeves. You just met our custodian today. Thomas nodded. That's right. And you're giving her $10,000 for pressing a piano key? Rosa felt her face burn hotter. Put that way, it sounded ridiculous, maybe even suspicious. She suddenly wished she could disappear back into her invisible world of mops and cleaning solutions. Perhaps I should explain, Thomas said, setting down his pen. He turned on the piano bench to face everyone. 27 years ago, I was a 16-year-old kid with nowhere to go. My mom had died and my dad was, well, not in the picture. I was technically in foster care, but I was sleeping in different places most nights. Rosa watched Thomas's face change as he spoke, lines appearing around his eyes that made him look older, more vulnerable. One of those places was my high school's music room. The janitor, a man named Joe Rivera, found me there one night. Instead of reporting me, he sat down at the piano and asked if I wanted to learn to play. Thomas's fingers brushed the keys without pressing them down. Joe didn't have any formal training himself, but he knew a few songs. He taught me what he knew, and then found a volunteer teacher who would give me proper lessons. The small audience was completely silent now. Even Mrs. Winters' usual stern expression had softened. That changed everything for me, Thomas continued. I had somewhere to go after school, a reason to stay out of trouble. Joe even talked the principal into letting me practice during lunch and after hours. Rosa felt something catch in her throat. She understood what it meant to have someone believe in you when no one else did. Music gave me discipline when my life had none. It taught me that practice leads to progress. That failure is just a step on the way to getting better. Thomas looked directly at Rosa. Joe changed my life with that simple act of kindness. Now I have the means to pass that forward. He turned back to his checkbook and continued writing. When he tore out the check, Rosa could see the numbers even from where she sat. $10,000. Her hands trembled as he held it out to her. Take it, he said gently. No strings attached. Rosa looked at the check, then at the faces watching her. She could see doubt in some eyes, envy in others. She thought about her children waiting at home, about the bills piling up on her kitchen counter, about Gabriel's voice when he sang and Isabel's joy when she danced. Slowly, she reached out and took the check. Thank you, she whispered because she didn't know what else to say. The paper felt impossibly light for something worth so much. Mrs. Winters stepped forward, her professional composure back in place. This is certainly a generous gesture, Mr. Reeves. We're thankful for your interest in our music program. Thomas nodded, but his eyes stayed on Rosa. Actually, I'd like to talk more with Rosa if that's all right. Perhaps we could use your office. The assistant principal hesitated, then nodded. Of course. This way. As they walked through the hallway, Rosa clutching the check in her hand, she could hear the whispers starting behind them. By tomorrow, everyone in school would be talking about what had happened. She tried not to think about that. Mrs. Winters led them to her office, then excused herself to give them privacy, though Rosa suspected she was going straight to call the principal. When they were alone, Thomas took a seat across from Rosa. You look worried, he observed. Rosa carefully folded the check and put it in her uniform pocket. People will talk, she said simply. Does that bother you? I'm not used to being noticed. She smoothed her hands over her work pants. I just clean. I don't... She gestured vaguely at the check in her pocket. Thomas nodded understanding. Joe, the janitor who helped me, he was like that too, quiet, kept to himself. But he noticed things others didn't. What happened to him? Rosa asked. A shadow passed over Thomas's face. He died about 5 years ago. Heart attack. I didn't find out until it was too late. He tapped his fingers on the armrest. That's part of why I'm doing this. I never got to thank him properly. Rosa thought about that. So this is about your guilt? Thomas looked startled, then laughed. A genuine laugh that softened his whole face. You're direct. I like that. He considered her question. Maybe partly, but mostly it's about honoring what he did by doing the same for others. He leaned forward. Rosa, the check is yours no matter what. But I'd like to offer something else if you're interested. What's that? She couldn't imagine what more this strange, rich man could possibly want to give her. Music lessons for your children. Professional ones with the best teachers I can find. Rosa felt her heart jump. Why? Because talent shouldn't be wasted due to lack of money. He said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Your son who sings, your daughter who dances, they deserve the chance to develop those gifts. Rosa thought about Gabriel, singing along to the radio while doing homework. About Isabel, creating dance routines in their tiny living room. What would proper training do for them? And what do you want in return? She asked cautiously. Thomas shook his head. Nothing. Well, almost nothing. He smiled. I'd like you to be part of the advisory board for my new music foundation. We'll be funding programs here and at other schools in the district. I need people who understand these communities, who see what others miss. Rosa stared at him. Me? But I'm just the person who's been watching this school and its students for 15 years. Thomas finished for her. You know which kids light up during music classes? Which ones linger by the band room door but never go in? You notice things, Rosa, that's valuable. Before she could respond, there was a knock at the office door. Mrs. Winters peeked in, looking slightly flustered. Excuse me, but Principal Donovan is on his way over. He was at a district meeting, but he's very eager to speak with you, Mr. Reeves. Thomas nodded. Of course. When Mrs. Winters closed the door again, he turned back to Rosa. School administrators. Always excited when money appears. He smiled wryly. Before the principal arrives and this becomes all about budgets and press releases, I need your answer. Will you and your children be part of this? Rosa looked down at her hands. Rough, calloused hands that had scrubbed thousands of floors and desktops. Hands that had just played a single note worth $10,000. She thought about what Thomas had said about Joe Rivera, the janitor who had changed his life. Yes, she said finally, looking up to meet his eyes. We'll do it. Thomas's face broke into a wide smile. Excellent. Here's my card. Call me tomorrow and we'll set everything up. He handed her a sleek business card with just his name and a phone number. As he tucked his checkbook back into his jacket, Rosa heard voices in the hallway. The principal had arrived. In moments, the office would be filled with handshakes and important talk about donations and programs. I should get back to work, Rosa said, standing up. I still have rooms to clean. Thomas stood too. Of course. But Rosa, he extended his hand. When she took it, his handshake was firm and warm. Thank you for playing that note. I have a feeling it's the beginning of something important. As Rosa slipped out of the office, passing Principal Donovan in the doorway, she felt the weight of the check in her pocket and Thomas's card in her hand. She thought about her children's faces when she told them what had happened, about the possibility of music filling their lives. One note, just one note, had changed everything. Rosa couldn't remember the last time she'd left work early, but today she practically flew out of the school building. The evening air felt different somehow, fresher, full of possibility. The check in her pocket seemed to weigh nothing and everything at once. The bus ride home was a blur. Rosa kept touching her pocket, making sure the check was still there. $10,000. The thought made her dizzy. She tried to plan what to tell her children, but the words wouldn't come together right. How do you explain that a stranger gave you more money than you make in 3 months just for pressing a piano key? When Rosa turned the key in her apartment door, she heard the usual sounds. The television playing softly, her son's voice talking over it, her youngest daughter's laughter. Home. Mama. Isabel spotted her first, running across the small living room to hug her. At 9, she still greeted Rosa this way every day, as if they'd been separated for weeks instead of hours. You're early, Lucia said from the kitchen doorway, wooden spoon in hand. At 16, she had her mother's practical nature, already cooking dinner without being asked. Everything okay at work? Gabriel looked up from his homework spread across the coffee table. Did you get fired? He asked bluntly, then winced when his older sister shot him a warning look. No, nothing like that, Rosa assured them, setting down her purse. Something happened today, something strange and wonderful. The 3 children exchanged glances. Their mother wasn't one for dramatic announcements. Sit down, Rosa said, gesturing to the worn couch. I have something to tell you. They gathered in their small living room, Lucia perching on the armrest, Gabriel sprawled on the floor, Isabel squeezed next to Rosa on the couch. Rosa took a deep breath and told them everything. About Thomas Reeves, about the piano, about the single note that had somehow been worth $10,000. When she finished, there was silence. Gabriel was the first to break it. "So this rich guy just shows up and hands you a check?" His tone was suspicious. "People don't do that, Mama." "I know it sounds crazy," Rosa admitted. She pulled the check from her pocket, unfolded it carefully, and laid it on the coffee table. Lucia leaned forward to examine it. "It looks real," she said softly. "It is real," Rosa replied. "And there's more. He wants to give all three of you music lessons. Professional ones." Isabel's eyes widened. "Like with real instruments and everything?" "Yes, mi vida. Real instruments, real teachers." Gabriel crossed his arms. "Why? What does he get out of it?" Rosa understood her son's skepticism. Life had taught them all that gifts usually came with strings attached. He said someone did the same for him once. "A janitor like me." Rosa remembered the emotion in Thomas's voice when he spoke of Joe Rivera, "And he wants me to be on some kind of board for his music foundation." "A board? Like with business people and stuff?" Lucia looked impressed. Rosa nodded, though the idea still seemed absurd to her. "He said I notice things others don't." Gabriel still looked unconvinced. "So what are we going to do with the money?" This was the question Rosa had been asking herself all the way home. $10,000 was more than they'd ever had at once. She'd always dreamed of what she would do with such a sum. Fix the leaky roof in the bathroom, replace the refrigerator that made concerning noises, maybe even take a family trip somewhere. But now that the money was real, she felt a strange responsibility. "First," she said carefully, "I think we should put some away. For your college fund, Lucia." Her oldest daughter's eyes lit up. Lucia had been talking about becoming a doctor since she was 10, but the cost of medical school had always loomed as an impossible mountain. "And some for emergencies," Rosa continued. "But also," she took a deep breath, "maybe we could look for a bigger apartment. One with enough space for a piano, if that's what you want." Isabel jumped up. "A real piano here?" "If that's what you want," Rosa repeated. "All of you. Gabriel, you could take singing lessons." Her son's suspicious expression finally softened. "For real?" "For real," Rosa confirmed. "But we need to be smart about this money. It's a lot, but it can disappear fast if we're not careful." Lucia, always the practical one, nodded. "We should make a budget. And you should call that number tomorrow, Mama. Find out more about these lessons." "I will," Rosa promised. Later that night, after the children were in bed, Rosa sat alone at their small kitchen table with Thomas's business card in front of her. The reality of the day's events was finally sinking in. She thought about what Principal Donovan's face must have looked like when he realized a millionaire had given his school janitor such a gift. There would be talk, questions, maybe even jealousy. Rosa had spent her life trying not to be noticed. Being invisible made the job easier. Just another worker in a uniform, keeping things clean while others went about their important business. Tomorrow she would be the center of attention, the subject of whispers. The thought made her stomach tighten, but then she thought about her children's faces when she'd shown them the check, about Isabel dancing around the living room at the idea of a real piano, about Gabriel trying to hide his excitement behind teenage coolness, about Lucia immediately planning for the future. Rosa picked up Thomas's card and placed it carefully in her wallet. Whatever came next, she would face it. The next morning arrived with a harsh buzz from Rosa's alarm clock at 5:30 a.m., the same time she woke every weekday. For a moment, she considered calling in sick. The thought of facing everyone at school made her chest tight. But Rosa Delgado had never been one to hide from hard things. She went through her morning routine as usual. A quick shower, a simple breakfast, laying out lunches for the children. By 6:45, she was on the bus to work, her uniform neatly pressed, her hair pulled back in its usual bun. The school building was quiet when she arrived, just like always. But when Rosa walked to the janitor's supply room to get her cart, her supervisor, Frank, was waiting. "Morning, Rosa," he said, eyeing her with unusual interest. "Heard you had quite a day yesterday, so it had already started." Rosa nodded, keeping her face neutral. "Good morning, Frank. $10,000, huh?" He leaned against the doorframe. "For playing one note on a piano?" "Yes," Rosa said simply, moving past him to prepare her cart. "Guess some people have all the luck," Frank muttered. Rosa paused, her hands on a bottle of cleaner. "It wasn't luck," she said quietly. "It was kindness. The kind that changes lives. Frank looked surprised. Rosa wasn't normally one to speak up. Before he could respond, the door opened and Mrs. Winters appeared. "Ah, Rosa. Just the person I was looking for. Could you come to my office? Mr. Reeves is on the phone and would like to speak with you." Rosa's heart jumped. "Now? But I need to start my rounds. Frank can cover for you," Mrs. Winters said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "This is important." As Rosa followed the assistant principal through the hall, she noticed how Mrs. Winters kept a careful distance between them, as if being a janitor was somehow contagious. It was nothing new, but today it bothered her more than usual. In the office, Mrs. Winters handed Rosa the phone with a tight smile and then hovered nearby, clearly intending to listen. "Hello?" Rosa said uncertainly. "Rosa. Good morning." Thomas's voice sounded cheerful. "I hope I'm not interrupting your work." "No. It's fine." She glanced at Mrs. Winters, who was pretending to sort papers while obviously eavesdropping. "I wanted to let you know that I've set up a meeting for this afternoon about the music program. The school board is very excited about the foundation. Can you join us? Say 4 p.m. in the conference room?" Rosa's stomach tightened. A meeting with the school board? People in suits and ties who normally didn't even see her as she emptied their trash cans? "I don't know if I should." "You absolutely should," Thomas interrupted gently. "I need you there, Rosa. Remember what we talked about? You see things others miss." Mrs. Winters was watching her openly now, curiosity written all over her face. "Okay," Rosa agreed finally. 4 o'clock. Excellent. Oh, and Rosa, bring your children if you can. I'd like to meet them." After hanging up, Rosa turned to find Mrs. Winters staring at her with an unreadable expression. "Is everything all right?" the assistant principal asked, her voice honey-sweet. "Yes," Rosa replied. "Mr. Reeves wants me at the meeting this afternoon. And my children too." Mrs. Winters' eyebrows rose. "I see. Well, this is all very unusual." Rosa nodded and headed for the door. She had bathrooms to clean and floors to mop, regardless of what meetings awaited her later. As she pushed her cart down the hallway, Rosa found herself hoping that whatever came next wouldn't change too much. She liked her job despite its hardships. She liked the rhythm of her days, the satisfaction of seeing dirty things become clean. But then she thought of the piano in the music room, of the single note she'd played, of the way it had felt when her finger pressed down on the key and music, just one pure tone, had filled the room. Maybe some changes were worth embracing, even if they were scary. By 3 o'clock, Rosa had cleaned every classroom in her section, working faster than usual. Her hands were raw from scrubbing, but her mind was elsewhere, on the meeting that loomed just an hour away. She kept glancing at the clock, her stomach tightening each time the minute hand moved. "Rosa." She turned to see Mr. Patterson, the security guard, walking toward her. Unlike most staff members who had been whispering about her all day, Mr. Patterson's smile seemed genuine. "I just wanted to say congratulations," he said, stopping beside her cart. "What happened yesterday? That was something special." Rosa nodded, not sure what to say. "Thank you. My sister's kids took music lessons," he continued. "Changed their lives. The oldest one's in college now, music scholarship." He patted her shoulder. "Good things happen to good people sometimes. That's all." His words stayed with Rosa as she finished her shift and went to pick up her children from school. Lucia had been surprised by the text asking her to bring her siblings to the high school after classes, but she hadn't asked questions. That was Lucia, reliable, adaptable, always ready to step up. When Rosa met them at the front entrance, all 3 children looked nervous. Gabriel had even combed his hair, and Isabel was wearing the dress she normally saved for special occasions. "Do we look okay, Mama?" Isabel asked, twirling once. Rosa smoothed her daughter's hair. "You look beautiful, all of you." She glanced down at her own uniform, the same gray pants and shirt she wore every day. "I didn't have time to change." "You look fine," Lucia assured her, though Rosa noticed her daughter eyeing the worn uniform with concern. They walked together through the quiet hallways toward the administrative section. Rosa had cleaned these rooms hundreds of times but had never entered them for a meeting. It felt strange, like walking into someone else's world. Outside the conference room, Rosa paused. Through the small window in the door, she could see people gathered around the large table. Principal Donovan, Mrs. Winters, several school board members in business attire, and Thomas Reeves standing at the head of the table gesturing as he spoke. Maybe this isn't a good idea, Rosa whispered, suddenly wanting to run back to the safety of her cleaning cart and invisible routine. Gabriel reached over and took her hand, something he hadn't done since he was little. "We've got this, Mama," he said quietly. Rosa squeezed his hand, took a deep breath, and opened the door. The conversation inside stopped immediately. All eyes turned to Rosa and her children standing awkwardly in the doorway. Thomas's face broke into a wide smile. "Rosa, perfect timing." He walked over and shook her hand warmly, then turned to her children. "And these must be Lucia, Gabriel, and Isabel. I've been looking forward to meeting all of you." Principal Donovan stood, his smile professional but distant. "Please come in. We've saved seats for you." As they took their places at the table, Rosa felt like an imposter. The other adults wore suits and dresses, carried folders and tablets, spoke in confident voices about budgets and programs. She was just a janitor in a gray uniform, hands rough from scrubbing toilets and mopping floors. Thomas seemed to sense her discomfort. He sat down beside her and leaned in slightly. "I'm glad you're here," he said quietly. "These meetings can get too wrapped up in details and forget the actual people involved." Before she could respond, Principal Donovan called the meeting to order. "As you all know, we're here to discuss Mr. Reeves's extraordinarily generous offer to fund a comprehensive music program at our school." He nodded toward Thomas. "Perhaps you'd like to outline your vision." Thomas stood. "Thank you, Principal Donovan. I'd be happy to." He moved to the front of the room with the ease of someone used to speaking to groups, the Rivera Music Foundation, named after a janitor who changed my life when I was a teenager. "We'll provide funding for instruments, instruction, and facilities. Every student at this school will have access to music education, regardless of their financial situation." Rosa watched her children's reactions. Isabel was bouncing slightly in her seat with excitement. Gabriel was trying to look cool, but his eyes were wide. Lucia was taking notes in her small notebook, always the responsible one. "We'll start with after-school programs and weekend workshops," Thomas continued. "Eventually, we hope to integrate music more fully into the regular curriculum. Studies have shown that music education improves performance in other academic areas as well." One of the board members raised her hand. "This all sounds wonderful, Mr. Reeves, but what exactly is the budget you're proposing?" Thomas smiled. "I'm prepared to commit $5 million over the next 10 years, with an initial investment of $1 million for instruments, facility improvements, and teacher salaries." The room went silent. Rosa heard Isabel whisper, "Wow," under her breath. "That's extremely generous," the board member said finally. "There's one condition," Thomas added. Everyone straightened, faces suddenly wary. Here it comes, Rosa thought. "The catch. I want Rosa Delgado to serve as community liaison for the program. Paid position, 15 hours a week. In addition to her regular job if she chooses to keep it." Rosa felt the blood drain from her face as everyone turned to look at her. "Mrs. Delgado has no background in music or education," Mrs. Winters pointed out, her voice carefully neutral. "Neither did Joe Rivera," Thomas replied. "But he understood what music could mean to a kid with nothing else. Rosa has been watching the students here for 15 years. She knows this community. She sees things others miss." Principal Donovan cleared his throat. Perhaps Mrs. Delgado could share her thoughts on this proposal? Rosa felt trapped, unprepared. What could she possibly say to these educated people about music programs and millions of dollars? But then she looked at her children, at Isabel's hopeful face, at Gabriel's protective stance. At Lucia's encouraging nod, Rosa stood slowly. Her hands were shaking, so she clasped them together. "I don't know much about music programs," she began softly, "but I know the children in this school. I see them every day." Her voice grew stronger. "I see the girl who comes early to sit in the band room and watch others practice, because her family can't afford an instrument. I see the boy who taps rhythms on his desk when he thinks no one's watching." She looked at Thomas. "Mr. Reeves is right. Music can save people, give them purpose, hope." She thought about the single note she'd played, how it had felt to create something beautiful. Even if just for a moment, every child deserves that chance. When she sat down, there was silence. Then Thomas began to applaud, followed by her children, then the rest of the room. Principal Donovan nodded. "Well said, Mrs. Delgado." He turned to the board members. "I think we can all agree this is an extraordinary opportunity for our school." The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of details. Budgets, timelines, contracts. Rosa tried to follow along, but her mind kept returning to Thomas's words. A paid position, 15 hours a week, money to do something besides cleaning up after others. It didn't feel real. After the meeting ended, Thomas approached Rosa and her children. "So," he said, smiling at Gabriel and Isabel, "I hear one of you likes to sing, and one likes to dance." Gabriel shrugged, suddenly shy. I guess Isabel had no such reservations. "I love dancing. But we don't have room in our apartment, and Mama says the neighbors downstairs complain about the noise." Thomas laughed. "Well, we'll have to fix that, won't we?" He turned to Lucia. "And what about you? Are you interested in music too?" Lucia shook her head. "I want to be a doctor, but I think what you're doing is really cool." "Doctors need hobbies too," Thomas replied. "Keep an open mind." He turned back to Rosa. "I've set up lessons for the kids this Saturday if that works. Just an introduction, to see what instruments they might be interested in." Rosa nodded, still overwhelmed by everything that had happened. "And for you," Thomas continued, "your first official day as community liaison will be next Monday. We'll start with just a few hours so you can get used to the role." "I still don't understand why you chose me," Rosa said quietly. Thomas's expression turned serious. "When you pressed that piano key yesterday, what did you feel?" Rosa thought back to the moment, the vibration traveling up her finger, the pure sound filling the room. "Like I was part of something bigger than myself," she admitted. "Like I mattered," Thomas nodded. "That's exactly why." He checked his watch. "I have to go, but we'll talk more soon. There's a lot of work ahead, but it's going to be worth it." He shook hands with each of her children. Then Rosa. "Remember, one note can change everything." As they watched him leave, Isabel tugged on Rosa's sleeve. "Mama, are we really going to learn instruments?" Rosa looked down at her daughter's hopeful face, at Gabriel's cautious excitement, at Lucia's proud smile. "Yes," she said, feeling certainty for the first time. "Yes, we are. 6 months could change everything." Rosa knew this now as she stood in the doorway of their new apartment, watching her children prepare for the evening ahead. The living room was twice the size of their old one, with tall windows that let in the afternoon sunlight. In the corner sat an upright piano, not brand new, but beautifully restored, its dark wood gleaming. Isabel sat at the piano, her small fingers moving carefully over the keys as she practiced the piece she would play tonight. At 10 years old now, she had taken to the piano like she'd been born to it. Her teacher, Ms. Chen, said she had natural talent, something Rosa had always known but never had the words for. "Mama, have you seen my good shoes?" Gabriel called from his bedroom, his own bedroom, something they'd never been able to afford before. "Check under your bed," Rosa called back. At 13, Gabriel had grown 2 inches in the past 6 months. His voice was changing too, cracking sometimes when he sang, but that didn't stop him. If anything, he sang more now, his voice filling their home at all hours. Lucia appeared beside Rosa, already dressed in the navy blue dress they had bought together just last weekend. At 17, she stood nearly as tall as her mother now, her face more serious, more adult every day. "You should get ready, Mama," she said, checking her watch. "We need to leave in 40 minutes." Rosa nodded and headed to her own bedroom, another luxury of their new life. As she changed from her work uniform, still a janitor's gray, though now she worked only mornings at the school, she caught her reflection in the mirror. She looked different somehow. It wasn't just the new clothes or the slightly better haircut. There was something in her eyes, in the way she held herself. 6 months ago she had been invisible, a woman who cleaned up after others and tried not to be noticed. Now, the sound of the doorbell interrupted her thoughts. "I'll get it," Isabel called, her piano practice forgotten. Rosa heard Thomas's voice greeting her daughter, followed by Isabel's excited chatter. She smoothed her dress, a simple blue one, nothing fancy, but nicer than anything she'd owned before, and went to join them. Thomas stood in their living room, looking exactly as he had that first day in the music room. Expensive suit, kind eyes, comfortable in any setting. But he wasn't a stranger anymore. Over the past 6 months, he had become something Rosa had never expected. A friend. "Rosa," he greeted her with a warm smile. "Ready for the big night?" She shook her head, feeling the familiar flutter of nerves. "Not really. All those people. They're coming to hear the music, not to judge you." Thomas reminded her gently. And you've done amazing work. The program would not be what it is without you. Rosa wasn't so sure about that. Yes, she had worked hard as the community liaison for the Rivera Music Foundation. She had helped identify students who might benefit from the program, spoken to parents who were hesitant to let their children participate, even learned a little about different instruments so she could talk about them knowledgeably. But the real work, the important work, had been done by the professional teachers Thomas had hired and the eager students who showed up every day. "Mama doesn't believe you," Isabel said matter-of-factly, returning to the piano bench. "She still thinks she's just a cleaning lady." "Isabel," Lucia scolded. "That's rude," Thomas laughed. "It's honest, though." He turned to Rosa. "You know, Joe Rivera felt the same way. I'm just a janitor," he'd say. "But he changed my entire life by seeing something in me that no one else did." He glanced at Isabel, her head bent over the piano keys again, "Just like you do with these kids every day." Gabriel emerged from his room wearing a button-up shirt that was slightly too big for him. "Room to grow," Rosa had said when they bought it. "Mr. Reeves, are you riding with us to the concert?" he asked. "If your mother doesn't mind," Thomas replied. Rosa smiled. "Of course not, but we should leave soon. Lucia, are you ready?" Her oldest daughter nodded, already gathering her purse and keys. Unlike Isabel and Gabriel, Lucia hadn't taken up a musical instrument. Instead, she had become the unofficial photographer for the foundation, documenting every concert, every workshop, every milestone. The photos she'd taken over the past 6 months would be displayed in the school lobby tonight. "I need to practice one more time," Isabel insisted, turning back to the piano. "You've practiced that piece 100 times, Gabriel groaned. "You know it perfectly." Isabel stuck out her tongue at her brother. "That's because I practice, and I don't?" Gabriel challenged. "Children," Rosa said softly. Just that one word, but both fell silent immediately. Some things hadn't changed. They still respected their mother's authority. "Sorry, Mama," they said in unison. Thomas checked his watch. "We should get going. Big crowd expected tonight." The thought made Rosa's stomach tighten. 6 months ago, she would have found any excuse to avoid being in front of a crowd. Now she was expected to stand on a stage and talk about the foundation's work. As they gathered their things and headed out the door, Rosa felt the familiar mixture of pride and terror that had become part of her new life. Change wasn't easy, even when it was good change. The school auditorium was packed. Rosa stood in the wings watching as families filed in, filling row after row of seats. She recognized many faces. Parents of students she had cleaned up after for years, teachers she had nodded to in hallways, neighbors from her old apartment building and her new one. In the front row sat Principal Donovan, Mrs. Winters, and several school board members, the same people who had sat around that conference table 6 months ago, skeptical of Rosa's role in the foundation. Now they smiled and waved when they spotted her. Thomas appeared beside her. "Nervous?" "Terrified," Rosa admitted. "Remember that first day, when I asked you to play one note?" She nodded. How could she forget? The moment that had changed everything. "This is just like that," Thomas said. "One step, one moment. You've done all the hard work already." Rosa wasn't sure if she believed him, but she appreciated the encouragement. Over the past months, she had learned that courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about doing things even when you were scared. From the other side of the stage, she could see Gabriel with the other young singers adjusting their sheet music. Isabel sat with a group of beginning piano students, her blue dress making her easy to spot. And Lucia moved through the crowd with her camera, capturing moments that would become part of the foundation's history. The lights dimmed, and Principal Donovan walked to the center of the stage to welcome everyone. As he spoke about the transformative impact of the Rivera Music Foundation, Rosa marveled at how much had changed in 6 months. More than 60 students were now involved in the foundation's programs. There were choirs, instrumental groups, dance classes, songwriting workshops. The music wing of the school, once quiet after hours, now hummed with activity every afternoon and weekend. And Rosa's family had changed too. They lived in a better apartment now in a safer neighborhood. Her children were thriving, discovering talents they might never have explored otherwise. Even Rosa herself had grown, taking on responsibilities she would never have imagined, speaking to groups, making decisions, being heard. all because of a single note played on a piano. And now, Principal Donovan was saying, I'd like to introduce the woman who has been the heart of this program, working tirelessly to connect students with musical opportunities. Our community liaison, Rosa Delgado. This was it. Rosa took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The bright lights blinded her for a moment, and the applause sounded distant, as if coming from underwater. But then her vision cleared, and she saw her children in the crowd, Isabel bouncing in her seat with excitement, Gabriel giving her a thumbs up, Lucia taking photos with a proud smile. Behind them, dozens of other children whose lives had been touched by the foundation. Parents who had approached her with tears in their eyes, thanking her for giving their children opportunities they couldn't provide themselves. Rosa stepped up to the microphone. 6 months ago, she would have been too terrified to speak, but tonight she found her voice. Thank you all for coming, she began. 6 months ago, a kind man asked me to play one note on a piano. Just one note. She smiled at Thomas, who stood at the back of the auditorium. I didn't know it then, but that one note would change everything. Not just for me and my family, but for all of us here tonight. She gestured to the students waiting to perform. These amazing young people have discovered something powerful, that music connects us, challenges us, lifts us up. Some of them had never touched an instrument before this program. Now listen to what they can do. Rosa stepped back as the first group of students took the stage, a beginning string ensemble. As they played their simple piece, she watched the audience's faces. The proud parents, the impressed teachers, the community members moved by what they were witnessing. This, she realized, was the true power of Thomas's gift. Not just the money, though, that had opened doors. Not just the lessons or instruments. It was the belief that everyone, no matter their background or circumstances, deserved the chance to create something beautiful. As Isabel's piano group prepared to take the stage, Rosa caught her daughter's eye. Isabel gave her a small wave, nervousness and excitement mixed on her face. You've got this, Rosa mouthed silently. Just like the single note Rosa had played 6 months ago, tonight was just the beginning. There would be more concerts, more students, more lives changed through music. The foundation was growing, reaching more families, creating more opportunities. And Rosa, once just a cleaning lady no one noticed, was helping make it all happen, one note at a time.